All right, welcome to Beyond the Stage. Let's get started. Now, before I realized halfway into this event that nobody can hear me, there was this professor a couple of years ago in Singapore. He was giving a class online, 2 hours, and only at the end of it did they realize that he was on mute for the whole time. So I don't want to make the same mistake. Could you please type a quick yes in the chat? If you can hear me, if you can see my slides. I see Philip. Great to see you, Philip. Louise. Wow, so many people. Great. Nicholas, Julia, Ashish, fantastic. Let's go then. Now, we called this event Beyond the Stage because there is a reason why. Now, if you know your company, some of you do, Ideas on Stage, that's the name of a company. We called it Beyond the Stage because today we are going to cover topics, principles, strategies that go beyond what we typically teach in our free sessions. So we're going beyond today, and it's great to see you all. Now, you don't have to, of course. I see that most of you are doing it already. If you feel like it, especially if you're dressed in this part of your body, if you want to show us how beautiful you are, if you want to turn your webcam on, that would be fantastic. You don't have to, but if you feel like it, that would be great. And also, just out of curiosity, can you let me know in the chat, where are you tuning in from? I'm in London, in the UK. What country or what city? Kyla, Paris, UK, Santa Monica, yeah, London, yeah. India as well, Tanya, yeah. West of Paris, very precise, Phil. Yeah, Toronto, fantastic. US, it's great to see interest in our sessions from all over the world. Now, the reason why what we are going to talk about today is important and you need to care about it is because, and by the way, today we are talking about all things presentations, public speaking, communication. It's important to you because a presentation is like a first date. It's an opportunity to make a great first impression. And the problem I see is that so many people and companies make the big mistake of making an invisible first impression when presenting. So it's not that they make a bad first impression, although sometimes they do, but often they don't make a good first impression either. It's just invisible. And we want to change that. And that's what we are going to do today. So by the end of this event, you'll have a very good understanding of how you can be more visible and confident and impactful when presenting or when communicating your ideas in general. And before we get started, now I see a lot of familiar faces and familiar names. For those of you who don't know me, just a super quick intro and then we'll get started. My name is Andrea. I'm a presentation coach. I'm the head of Ideas on Stage UK, but we are also in Paris, Milan, Barcelona, and LA. Since 2010, we've been working with thousands of clients, from small business owners and professionals to companies like Microsoft, Lacoste, the World Bank. We've been coaching more than 500 TEDx speakers so far. And we specialize in working with business owners and their teams who want to become the best presenters in the industry. Our mission is to stop great ideas from failing just because of the way they are presented. And our vision is to help hundreds of thousands of entrepreneurs and their teams use their voice, use the power of their ideas, their communication, so they can grow their business, increase their influence, and make a positive impact in the world. And that's it. Enough about me. We are not here today for me. We are here for our three amazing speakers, Phil Wicknell, Rose Bloomfield, and Michael Rickwood. Now, all of them are colleagues of mine at Ideas on Stage. Phil is our co-founder. Rose is the head of Ideas on Stage US, and Michael is a chief coaching officer. Now, Phil is going to talk about how to create versatile, non-linear presentations. Because as you'll see, if you think about it, sometimes when you give a presentation, your audience will want to know what to hear and when. And so in these cases, it makes a lot of sense to create a non-linear presentation, and Phil is going to show you how you can do that. Rose is going to talk about how to communicate with impact. And as you see, there is a simple formula for that, for you to be able to communicate with impact. And the formula is preparation plus presence. That's it, preparation plus present. I'm not going to tell you more. Rose is going to give you more details. And then Michael is going to talk about a very important subject, the Q&A. How can you run a successful Q&A session? Because often what happens is, let's say, for example, you have an important presentation coming up, and say, for example, that you've prepared yourself really well. Sometimes that doesn't happen, but say that we are prepared. Often what I see is that even when we are prepared, we forget that there is a Q&A session as well. The Q&A is part of the presentation. And Michael is going to give you some tips and principles and things to consider for you to be able to run that part of the presentation, the Q&A, in the most effective way possible. Just so you know, in terms of agenda, we are going to have each of them, Phil, Rose, and Michael, giving a 15-minute presentation. So it's going to be short and punchy, and then we'll have a bit of a Q&A after each presentation. By the way, as you watch the presentations, feel free, and please do use it. Do use the chat here on Zoom, share your reflections, your key insights. And if you have any questions, by all means, do type your questions in the chat, and then I'm going to take them, and I'll try and make our speakers' life difficult later with the Q&A. No, I'm just kidding, but please, let's make this as interactive as possible. And I think we are good to go. So we'll start with Phil. And I would say, Phil, whenever you want, just take your time, feel free to share your screen. And we are going to talk about how to create versatile, non-linear presentations. Off you go, Phil.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Thank you. So hello, everybody. It's great to be back with you. It's great to see so many of you here online. And I'm going to be going through a non-linear presentation. So that might sound a little bit strange, but hey, this is what we're here for. Non-linear presentations, you might not quite understand what that is, and you might be thinking, well, actually, what is a linear presentation? First of all, it's all very well being non-linear, but what's actually a linear presentation? So let's have a quick look first at what is a linear presentation. And I'm going to show you an example of a linear presentation, because this is the kind of thing we do an awful lot. When I'm, for example, giving a presentation training course, this is where I'm probably going to be going through the 5 stages of the presentation score method, which is the one which I've outlined in Business Presentation Revolution, which I'm sure Andrea will mention to you again later on. So I will go through those 5 stages one by one. Foundation, where you try to make sure you've got a strong foundation, you know who you're speaking to, why they're there listening, what are their needs, what is the context. You then can think about, how do I want to transform those people, and what can I say to do that? So what are the raw ingredients? Then you move into the creation phase. You use the art of storytelling to be making sure that those messages are delivered in a compelling way, in a suitable order, and you get their attention and keep their attention. Then you move into the illustration phase, where you think, does my audience need any slides, any visual aids to illustrate what I'm saying? And then you can think about, well, preparing, rehearsing, and delivering your presentation and making that connection with the audience. So this is the method that we use to prepare presentations. It's the method that I've used today to prepare this presentation, but it's also the running order for the training course, because you don't go through the illustration phase before you've actually spoken about the foundation phase. So this is very much a linear kind of presentation. It's like a railway line, right? It's as if we're on a track. We're starting from point A, we're going to go to point B, and we're going in that order. We're not going to be jumping around and we're doing this and then do that. We're going to be doing it in a specific order. Now, most presentations will tend to be like that. But sometimes you actually need something which isn't so linear. I'd like you to imagine you're taking your children to a theme park. And they're all excited about going on all the different rides. Well, just imagine that you as the parent tell them, okay, kids, we're going to do this ride, then this, then this, then this, then this, then this, then this. And you basically map out the whole day and you tell them exactly what they're going to do in exactly what order. And if one of the kids says, Daddy or Mummy, I want to be doing this one, you don't say, oh, you'll have to wait until 3:35. We'll be doing it this afternoon. The kids will not be happy. Well, it's very much the same if you try to do that in a board meeting with senior executives. If they say, please show me the financial projections, what you do not say is, if you can just wait another 15 minutes, I'll be coming to that. So this is where the linear presentation possibly doesn't work. So when you're in that kind of situation, you might find that some NLP is going to be better. And when I'm saying NLP, I'm not thinking of neuro-linguistic programming, which is what you usually will imagine NLP stands for. No, NLP from now on, for you and for me, it's for non-linear presentations. Presentations where you don't define right at the start what's going to be said in what order, but you create something versatile, something flexible, which will allow you to achieve your objectives even with people who might want things done in their order. So I'm going to answer in this talk, I'm really going to answer 3 key questions about non-linear presentations. Firstly, what are they? When you should be using them, and how to create them. So since I'm talking about non-linear presentations, I'd like to make this a non-linear presentation. So I'd like you to tell me which of these you'd like me to cover first. Do you want me to tell you what a nonlinear presentation is in a bit more detail, when you might find it useful, or how to create one? So let's have a quick look. Please take into your chat and I'll try to see which are the majority ones which we can use. So I'm seeing some whens, I'm seeing some hows, and I'm seeing quite a lot of whats. There's some hows and there's some whens. I'm probably seeing more whats. So what I'm going to do, we can't please everybody in this one, and I'm not using everyone. And Dan's saying who. Thank you, Dan. Always good to have somebody who is thinking out of the box. So there we are. So I'm going to start off with the what, and it could have been the when. The whole point is it could be in any order that I want, so, or that you want. So I'm going to start with the what. I'm going to click on the what here. And so what is a non-linear presentation compared to a linear presentation? So if you think of the linear presentation as being something which is going to have an introduction, a clear development in a specific order, and then a conclusion, well, a non-linear presentation is probably going to be similar, but not quite the same. In that middle main part of the presentation, you're actually going to have several different parts which could come in any order. And sometimes what you'll actually have is a PowerPoint slide with a menu which could have 6 or 9 or 8 or however many different parts of the presentation, which you could be covering in any kind of order. So in this case, in this presentation, I had 3, the what, the when, and the how. In some other kinds of presentations, you might have more different pieces that you could cover. The really important thing to remember is they need to be independent. They need to be self-contained parts of the presentation, and they need to be able to work in any order. So there's no point in having something in part 5, which depends on them already knowing something from part 2, because you might find that they ask you to talk about part 5 first. That's where the introduction is particularly important. Before you allow your audience to choose which part they want to hear, you need to make sure that all of the baseline information that they need is in the introduction, so that every individual piece, if that's the first one they go for, it will work. There's no dependency on any of the other pieces. So these pieces could be a marketing plan, or it could be a resourcing plan or a financial plan. Each of them needs to be self-contained. Anything they need to know first should go in the introduction. So is the introduction the agenda? I'm seeing a question there. Not necessarily. The agenda might be in the introduction, but generally what I will do is the introduction tells them what they need to know before you get into the detail, and then you show them this kind of maybe a slide with 6 or 9 different pieces, and you say, so these are the areas I'll be able to cover. Which would you like me to handle first? And then you get into the conclusion. So after you've gone through all of that, the detail, all of the different points that you need to cover, that's when you make sure you've got a conclusion. You don't just say, oh, well, that's everything, thank you. You make sure you've got a strong conclusion, which gives the call to action that you've planned in advance. Sometimes you need to be flexible, because this is the kind of thing you'll use more in a meeting than in an on-stage presentation. And in a meeting, generally, it's not just, I'm going to speak, you're going to listen, and you're going to do what I want. Usually in this kind of meeting, you're going to listen, you're going to discuss, and then on the basis of what you've decided together, then you give a call to action. So you may need that conclusion to be a little bit flexible in some cases, but always make sure you've got something planned where you say, and these are the next steps that we're going to work on. So always focus on that introduction, always focus on the conclusion, and then in the middle, that's where you can have all of these flexible pieces which can come in whatever order your audience wants. So I'm now going to go back to the what, the when, and the how. We've talked about the what. Now, what should we go through next? Now, I did see a lot of people saying when earlier on, and you're probably thinking, oh, I wish we'd had the when first. So why don't we go for the when now, right? Rather than go through another poll in the chat, let's click on the when. And it just turns out that it happens to be this order. I could have done this in any order that I wanted. So when would you use a nonlinear presentation? Well, there are several situations, and most of them come down to it when the audience thinks they're important people. So first situation when you're presenting to people who think they're important is when you're presenting to the board or the executive committee. Usually, if you're presenting to them, then that means they're more important than you are. And there's usually only 30 seconds when you might be able to speak without being interrupted, and that's the first 30 seconds. So make sure you get your introduction in, and then give them the flexibility. Give them the flexibility on what they would like you to cover. In those situations, they probably have already read some kind of pre-read document that you've been asked to send them in advance. So they might have questions right at the beginning, and it might be more of a discussion than a presentation. But if you've got your supporting materials and your graphs, etc., in your slides, well, that's where having the menu slide, where you can simply click to get to whatever they want to talk about, can be extremely powerful in a board situation. Likewise, in some kind of management review, where it might not be an executive committee, but where, again, you've got senior managers who are wanting to review a project, for example, and this is where there might be multiple aspects which could be covered in any kind of order. The first time I ever used a nonlinear presentation was, in fact, a management review when I was working at Hewlett-Packard. It was about 15 years ago, which does not make me feel young. And I remember we'd just sold a really big deal, and I needed to explain to our senior managers what we had sold and how we were going to be delivering it. So it was a situation where I thought, yeah, these people will ask questions all the time. I will create that kind of menu slide where I had the introduction, then I had the menu, and then I had a conclusion. And the financial aspects of the deal, the delivery aspects, the geographical aspects, because it was a global deal, all of these different things were in there. And so every time they asked a question, I was never more than 2 clicks away from the answer, because I had all of those bases covered, and I did not need to leave my PowerPoint or escape out of the slideshow view in order to move around between the slides and get somewhere. And this is because I was using the hyperlinks within the slides. And I'll show you exactly how to do that in the how section in a few minutes. But in a management review, that can work extremely well. So we see the theme here is it's when the audience thinks they're important, and therefore they won't just let you speak for 15 minutes and then ask questions. They will want to have things going in their order according to the questions when they come up with them. Another situation where that might work is if you're making an investor pitch. Now, maybe not the first investor pitch where you're on stage at some kind of demo day and there are 4 people before you and 4 people after you. Well, this is where maybe you've already seduced the investor and you've made them interested, and then they might then be thinking, okay, well, let's have a meeting. And then you've got maybe 30 or 60 minutes with them. In this case, you may want to be using a non-linear presentation, which is where you can have various different aspects. So you can say, okay, Mr. Investor or Mrs. Investor, you've seen a bit about who we are, and you give them the kind of investor pitch at the beginning so that they remember what you are and what you do. But then afterwards, this is where you can say, well, what would you like us to cover? Do you want to cover the client's pain points initially, or should we talk about the team? Sometimes the investor really wants to talk about the team straight away. Sometimes it will be the market. This is just an example of 6 things. There could be 9, there could be 12, it could be lots of different things that they might want to cover. But again, if the investor is an important person, they might really want to know exactly what the answer is to their question at the time they have the question. So give them the control. Now, the next point is going to be how. Before we do that, I see a question from Jens. Hello, Jens. If you're using presenter view, can you skip the hyperlinks? Well, you can always skip a hyperlink by simply moving forward and back between the slides, which I've been doing in some of these times. If you're in, and I'm using presenter view now, I'm actually sharing my second screen and not my first screen. So I'm seeing the slides and all of the different things in the presenter view, and that can work well. If you're not using presenter view because you don't have 2 screens, for example, or it just doesn't work on your on whatever you're using, well then you can use the idea of the hyperlinks to move around well. You can also, and I've done this recently with a luxury firm, you can produce your PowerPoint document, send it around to people. This is a document, not a slide, with the hyperlinks. Send it as a PowerPoint slideshow file, which means when they open it, it all opens automatically in the slideshow view, and then they simply click around within it as if it was a web page, and that can work extremely well. So let me have a quick look at then the how. How can you produce this, right? Oh, Annette's asking me to show the when slide one more time. Okay, so I'll go back. I will click on the when. You see, I'm never more than two clicks away from things. So the when slide, there we are. So a board, a management review, or potentially an investor pitch, which could have various different parts within the presentation. I hope that's helpful for you, Annette. I see a question from Lucinda as well. Hello, Lucinda. Does this depend as well on the personality type of the audience? Yes, absolutely. There are some people who... Someone's speaking in the background. Yes, it does depend on the personality type. We see it also in France. There are certain engineers, for example, who really like to be taken on that kind of journey, as you say, Lucinda, and you give them that logical flow leading up to a recommendation. There are many other people who will just want to say, I have this question, I want the answer now. So up to you to know your audience, absolutely. So there we are, I've gone back to the when. Let me get into the how. So when we come to the how, the best way I can show you this is actually to get out of my slides and show you what I've been doing within my PowerPoint. So if I actually show you what I'm doing here, these are the slides that I have had today. So I'm looking at them on my second screen. So excuse me if I'm looking away from the my webcam. So you'll see I have these various different slides in the introduction. You'll see that I have the menu slide. So here is the menu slide, slide 6. And what you'll see on this is that behind the what, for example, I've very simply gone to the insert menu. I've gone to hyperlink, and I've chosen to link to a different slide on this document. In this case, slide 7, which happens to be the next slide, but it might not have been. If I look at the how, well, then that is linking to insert hyperlink, and I choose that's going to slide 16. And if I go down to slide 16, then you'll see that that is indeed the how slide, which we just saw a moment ago. What you can also see is that on these detail pages, so one of these when pages, for example, I've also got a hyperlink which goes back to the menu slide. So if I again go to the insert menu and I go to hyperlink, behind when, here, this is going back to slide 6, which was my kind of menu slide with the what, the when, and the how. It's really simple. It just means that I can get to any part of the presentation from any part of the presentation really in no more than 2 clicks. And that can be extremely powerful. So it's very simple. Sometimes you can have an icon in a corner or a little arrow, maybe something that nobody notices. It's easier, as far as I'm concerned, if it's something which is already on the slide, which doesn't look out of place, like these kind of hyperlinks. And there we are. We've now simply got a presentation which is non-linear. It's a bit like the web page, and you can go through it in any order you want. So if I now finish up here and I come back to my conclusion, you'll actually also see that I have behind the N here, I also have a link so that at any time, if Andrea tells me, Phil, you're out of time, I can click on the N and I get to the conclusion of my presentation. And this is where we see some non-linear presentations. So these are presentations which can be extremely powerful because when your audience thinks they're important and they will want to define what you talk about and when, and they might interrupt you at any time, this is where you're giving them control. Or at least you're giving them the illusion of control, because what actually is happening is you're giving them the menu of things which they can choose from. You're giving them the things they could ask you to talk about, and you're prepared to talk about them in any kind of order. So that means that really you're giving them the illusion of control. But you're the one who's actually in control, and that can make all the difference. It can also be very impressive. If I come back to finish the story I gave you earlier on when I was using my very first nonlinear presentation 15 years ago at HP, at the end of that meeting, one of the vice presidents came up to me and he said to me, Phil, that was really impressive. I've never seen a meeting run like that. It was very powerful. Just tell me one thing. What software were you using? And I had to tell him I was using PowerPoint. And he was blown away. He didn't realize you can use it for that. But PowerPoint is extremely powerful. The hyperlinks is just a very simple function, but you can use it to transform a simple PowerPoint into a nonlinear presentation, which allows you to keep control by giving them the illusion of control. Sometimes the most flexible route really is the shortest route to success. So next time you're meeting people who think they're more important than you are, try a nonlinear presentation, and you might find that it really is successful for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. That was excellent. Thank you very much for making it super practical, even showing inside your PowerPoint. That was great. Now, for everybody, it would be great if you could type your number one takeaway, the key thing, the key insight, the key reflection that you've got from Phil's talk. And of course, if you have a question, please type in the chat. Now, perhaps, Phil, we do have maybe just a couple of minutes for a quick question. Let's see if there is something coming up. If not, I do have a question for you, because before you talked about meetings, and let me see, but before my question, let me see, there is Dan, for example. If you're giving the document to others, can you turn off the hyperlinks easily across the whole presentation?
Ooh, good question, Dan. I'm not sure that you can. I think if you want to be giving it in a way where the hyperlinks are not going to work, simply print it as a PDF and send them the PDF. And that way, I believe you won't have the hyperlinks in there. Depends on the software you're using to create the PDF, though, because in some PDF creators, the hyperlinks will actually come through. No, if you want to be sending it as a document without hyperlinks, then I'm not certain. I've never tried. I've always wanted, if I'm sending it as a document, as a non-linear kind of file, I actually like the hyperlinks and I want people to be able to use them. What you actually find is most people don't know they're there anyway, or even if you tell them, they still don't use them.
Thank you, Phil. And maybe one more question from my side. You talked about meetings before, and of course, in a meeting, the dynamic, by definition, a meeting is much more dynamic, interactive. What do you think? Does that mean that for a meeting, we always need to create a non-linear presentation. Is that the case? What are your thoughts?
It's a very good question. I think the simple answer I would give is no. And that is because I have the last 2 years have taught me one thing, and I've been teaching this in my virtual meeting revolution training courses: never pollute a meeting with an unnecessary presentation. Meetings should be for discussions. They should not be a top-down presentation unless there is no better way to achieve your objectives. So I would usually say in a meeting, try to make sure that if people need to know something, give them a document and give them time to read it, which is what they will do at Amazon, for example, where meetings start with reading a document in silence and then they discuss it. And there is no presentation. It works extremely well, and we've worked with many companies to implement that. And therefore, you don't always need a presentation. There are some cases where you do, and in those cases where you actually do need to be presenting something, it could be a pitch, it could be a management review. Sometimes it could be what we call in French a soutenance, which is like a sales presentation where you're shortlisted for a request for proposal, and you've got to be trying to convince them to choose you and not somebody else. In that case, a non-linear presentation can be very helpful. So I would say first choice, no presentation for a meeting. Second choice, non-linear presentation. Third choice, maybe you need something top down, but keep it as short as possible.
Perfect. Phil, thank you very much again. And now let's continue. Now we've got Rose. As I said earlier, Rose is going to talk about how to communicate with impact. So Rose, off you go, take your time, feel free to share your screen, and the audience is all yours.
Excellent. Can you see the first slide?
Yeah.
Great. Good morning from California. A question. What do you want to change? If you could change something at work, in your life, in yourself. Leaders are expected to inspire and influence every day, which I know we all know communication is a huge aspect of that. We need to achieve results as part of a team, be it professional or today, we're all feeling how to make a change as an individual in the human collective in the world. So every time we speak or don't, every time we listen or don't, we make an impact. So if you want to level up in your career, or you want to build stronger, more fulfilling relationships, if you want to inspire versus intimidate or manipulate, and if you want to feel excited to present or speak versus obligated, terrified, or on autopilot, then I invite you to give yourself the gift of really tuning in right now and reflecting as I take you through how to communicate with impact. My name is Rose Bloomfield. I have had a diverse background in communication. The reason I'm here today is really because of my past. First, as a child actress, I worked in TV as a teen, interviewing people on Disney like Nicolas Cage, Anne Hathaway, going to sets around the world, then did a documentary series that brought me on stages like Oprah Winfrey, Good Morning America. And this continued being a public speaker throughout my life until I studied cultural anthropology and added in the human aspect of culture, and then worked at a startup for a couple of years where I learned about rapid growth as a business and how to lead internal communication that works as you scale rapidly. Today, I have had the pleasure of working with people like Phil and Andrea for the last 5 years, which is amazing. And at first, 3 of those years were in Paris, where I got to work as part of the team, leading corporate workshops, trainings, individual coaching, group coaching. And that's what I do based in Los Angeles today. I am also very passionate. This is like my life's work, is helping empower speakers to make a positive impact in the world and in their own life. So Andrea let the cat out of the bag. There's a simple formula. Simple does not mean easy. I know we all know this. There is a simple formula for making a concerted impact, because we all know we're always making an impact no matter what. Preparation, right? Phil mentioned it. You can learn these tools. I'm going to give you just a little quick glance at what those are again. Preparation. What we're going to dive deeply into is presence. And that's what gives us the change. These tools will be applied in a polished setting, informal, personal. So whether you're giving a presentation or public speaking, or you're facilitating a meeting, or you're writing an important email, these tools apply. So the first step, and if you are familiar with business presentation revolution content, is the first revolution is it's not your presentation, it's theirs. This is not mine, this is yours. So I had to think about what would be most important for you. The second revolution is aiming not to inform, but transform. So that's the power of impact we're looking at. A little story. Back in 2018, I was living in Paris, and je parle un peu de français. When I was there in 2018, I spoke some French, but I didn't speak extremely well. And one day, I had the inquiry come through our company website to lead a pitch workshop in the Alps for some young entrepreneurs. It was in French. I remember Phil, who you just heard, saying, you know what, Rose, you're great, but they don't pay, you know, they weren't at our rate. I didn't speak excellent French. He was suggesting, let's let this one pass. Everybody was booked. Michael, however, who you're going to hear in a second, saw how excited I was by this opportunity. And he goes, Rose, if you can do it and you don't have something booked, then go for it. So you can imagine I had to work my tail off. I had to know the ABCs. Who's my audience? What are their needs? What's the context? This is not a virtual webinar. This was going to take 2 trains to get me up into the mountains. It was going to be an ordeal. It was 15 young entrepreneurs from around the banlieue, the outskirts of Paris, from underprivileged backgrounds. What did I want to do? I was going to have to inspire change in them. So my transformational objective was to spark in them the ability to make impact through their pitch skills. All right, so ABC's transformational objective conclusion. These are your 3 key elements for really preparing. If you had to have a pocket, right, like pocket size prep material, that's it. So I did my best. I did my homework. I rehearsed in French. I got vocabulary. I changed my slides. Then I needed to show up. I needed to be there. So I had to get my ass to the Alps with all of this stuff. And by the time I got there, I had missed my train. I was exhausted. But I had prepared so well that the next day, after 4 hours of sleep, I was able to really be in the room with them. I could connect. I had enough in me to deliver and pick up on the differences of their needs, what we just heard from Phil about how to tailor things, the presentation in the moment to the audience. I was able to listen to that and adjust. So while I was having an impact on them, they were having an impact on me. And that's how it needed to go. I was exhausted, but I was prepared so I could be present. All right, I'm going to set that story aside for now. And I can just tell you that that group took away all the skills that they needed in pitch work with my rudimentary French. And this also goes to people who ever feel concerned about presenting in a second language. You do not need to be perfect in that language to have an amazing impact. Communication is about understanding. And if you can understand them and they can basically understand you, so much can transpire. So presence is power. You can either dim that power or you can amplify it. So let's dig into the dimmers, which include inauthenticity. It's not your voice. It's actually you're using theirs or someone else's voice. Diminishing speech, we're going to look at what that is, and disembodiment. So on the contrary, amplifiers are being yourself, using your own voice, using powerful speech, and being in your body. We all have this dimmer. We can turn up the volume or turn it down. And I'm just noticing my slides are not keeping time here. Andrea, can you just give me a time check?
That's, yeah, we
We're
can see
good.
that well,
About
yeah.
maybe 10 more. Okay, good. So if you are not present, if you're not in your body and you're not using your voice, you're not there. That was not a technical glitch. That's essentially the same thing, turning off the camera, not being there, right? Not being present. We've lost the connection with our audience. So this is how important it is to know how to amplify our presence. You're either in the room based on that preparation and your ability to be vulnerable and connect, or you're not even there, you're just taking up time. So the challenge is becoming aware enough of what level we're at and why we're there. Now let's take a look really briefly at the inauthenticity piece. I'm just going to scan this with you because we don't have time to dig in. In my larger presentation, we go one by one here, and it's really interesting for minority or female leaders. The double bind, the outer critic, the imposter syndrome, people pleasing. So if I were to summarize this inauthenticity piece and the reasons that we step out of our own voice, it's for some reason thinking they know better, or I need to please the outside norms and use what I think works, you know, try to sound like Steve Jobs or try to sound like my boss. Okay, let's look at diminishing speech. So I'm just here to ask for just a little bit of your time, if you wouldn't mind. Am I making sense? So what is impact really? I don't know. Maybe you probably know better than I do, but I'm going to do the best I can today to explain to you what I think. But you know, don't take my word for it. So all of these hedges, just actually, kind of, almost, sorry, but I'm no expert, but just a little bit, all of this minimizing speech, which I want to ask you all right now. Use the chat. What of these minimizers, these dimmers, look most familiar to you? Either you hear them most frequently or you yourself use them. Can you chat them to me? What are the dimmers? Yeah, you know, kind of piling on words. Yes. Am I making sense? Philip, yeah, so we all use and also tends to signify lack of preparation. It can signify self-doubt for sure. And becoming comfortable with something else we'll learn more about, with pausing, makes a huge difference. And that's essentially allowing for silence, which is terrifying for people, right? Because it's vulnerable. And people might think, oh, does she not know what she's going to say? No, actually, when you take a pause and you allow there to be silence, the audience can let information sink in, substituting a question for a statement. Beautiful. So thank you, everyone, for sharing. This is really powerful work, especially with women leaders. I offer this to a lot of employee resource groups where females come to the table, and there's a reason why we do this, right? Why do we dim our presence? Why would women or minority leaders or anybody on stage, men are absolutely included in this list here. Why do we use them? There are three major reasons. Habit, we've heard other people do it, so we do it. Two is self-doubt. We're questioning ourselves as we're speaking. And the third is strategic softening. So I want to say something really powerful to my higher up, my manager, my boss, my manager's manager, but I'm scared that they're going to disagree or feel threatened or pushed upon. So I'm going to strategically soften what I'm going to say as I push back. So that's one of the major reasons that we can see, well, just a little bit, you know, or maybe you probably know better. So a little flattery there before I put in. Here's a little tip, a little tool that can help break us away from the dimmers. Wait, or why am I talking? Why am I saying So especially if you're someone who's apt to pile on and rush, not pause, that usually can signal something in the body, some disembodiment starting to happen, where we're feeling stressed, and scared. So our parasympathetic nervous system is activated, and we're in fight, flight, fright mode here, and we're starting to speak a lot. So pausing can really help break us from the ums, the just, and we're going to look at powerful speech in just a second. So Patricia says, but that can be simple diplomacy too. Yes, depending on how it's being used. So this all comes down to intent, right? And Patricia, we can come back to that in the Q&A if you want to go deeper. All right, so lastly here for the dimmers is disembodiment. Activated nervous system, we kind of leave our body in that moment. We're scared, so we're not making eye contact anymore. We're starting to close off from our audience. We're not going to look. We're not taking in visual cues. And why do we get disembodied? It is much easier to do that when we're exhausted, or we're overworked, or we haven't taken good care of ourselves. All right, so if you're feeling foggy brain, or you're getting shut down a lot, or you're feeling really overwhelmed, it's a good cue to come back into some of the amplifiers for presence. So let's take a look at those. How do we move from the dimmers into raising the volume of our presence? Using our voice, using powerful speech, and being in our body. So here's an example of someone I find who is such a great example of being present and embodied and authentic. Her name is Estelle Lovie. I had the pleasure and privilege of coaching her for this TEDx back in 2018 in Paris. She is a powerful symbol working with women and leaders around the world too, in helping them increase their presence. What we mean is her message, her body, her posture, her tone were all aligned. So that impact, like a conduit of energy, was very clear when she was on stage. So what does powerful speech look like? Short and bold sentences, punctuating and pausing. So being very direct, clear. Brene Brown says, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. I think we need to, I propose that, you know what? I see it differently. Can we take a look at that? Speaking to someone, giving feedback, something isn't working here, but let's take a look at it. Let's work it out together. Straight talk. Straight talk is the opposite to vocal fry. That's where you close off the back of your throat and you don't have a lot of power in your voice because you're cut off from your diaphragmatic breath. So that can be really hard to hear. It can also be really hard on the throat, and it signals not making a clear connection with the audience through your voice. So relaxing and using straight talk as another piece. So vocal fry is one, up talk is another. You may have seen that in the dimmers, and that's where you end each sentence as if it were a question. Even though it's a period, it sounds like a question mark, and that is really challenging on getting your power across. So we want our language to show that we believe in what we're saying, because if we believe it, our audience will. The opposite is also true. So breathe deeply, relax yourself as much as you can, do what you need to do to get in your body. Breathing, opening, and taking care of yourself. These are no small feats today. From running a business to being a parent, to being a partner, to if you've got any other hobbies or passions that you're working on, it's a lot to balance. So taking a look at that balance really makes a difference. And here I want to take 1 second to remind us of the 7:38:55 rule. Anyone here heard of Dr. Mehrabian? This, yes, Andrea, great. Okay, so 7:38:55. I want to ask you guys, what do you think, if 55% is what is making the biggest impact through your communication, right? We've got various elements that are communicating. How powerful do you think words are in terms of that impact? 7:38:55, which one are words? 7:38:55. Yes, Kayla. Yes, Patricia. Yes, Dan. 7% are the words we choose. That means 55% is our body language, Our body is speaking for us all the time. So we need to take care of that instrument. All right, getting close here to the end. Phil has some great sayings if you haven't seen already. One of them, and this is the last revolution for the 5th step of connection, aim not for perfect, but for personal. That's where we make an impact. So preparation plus your presence equals change here. Like a drop of water sending ripples out through the entire body. Let's come back for a moment to that story I mentioned about Inco. That's the name of the incubator that had me present on pitch in the Alps. When I'm talking about impact, I mean, we're here beyond the stage today. Let's look beyond the pitch. Let's look beyond your presentation. I was in that room. I showed up prepared. I was present. I fulfilled my mission. Results were achieved. What I didn't know was that someone was in the back of the room that day from the US consulate in the south of France who took my card and said, thank you very much. That woman, Vanessa, passed my card on to her friend and colleague in Toulouse. That friend of hers had a coffee with the head of events at a major airline company who runs events. I get some random LinkedIn message 2 or 3 weeks after that pitch workshop asking if I would propose for a major event. I'm not going to give details here because this was a confidential experience, but that major event, I repeated that formula, preparation plus presence. I won that proposal for Ideas on Stage. And thanks to that proposal and thanks to that amazing event, that led to 4 other events that year. So because of that one 500 euro pitch workshop I led in the Alps and prepared for, we had over 100,000 euro revenue because that pitch workshop went well and it spoke on behalf of the quality of the preparation and presence that Ideas on Stage could bring. So you never know what's possible. You never know the end impact of your presentation. So believe in yourself and the power of what you're doing. Prepare to make an impact. Be present with powerful language and be fueled by your intention. So visualize success. Believe in yourself. And I hope that with these tools and what you're about to hear from Michael, that you're going to feel even more prepared, present, and impactful in your upcoming communication. And if you want any help, you know where to find us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rose. For everybody, again, I'm curious, can you let us know what's your #1 takeaway from Rose's presentation? Can you type in the chat, please? The one thing, the reflection, the insight you are taking away from Rose today. And in the meantime, Rose, we just have time for a quick question from me because I'm curious. Now, you talked about two sides of a spectrum: low impact communication and high impact communication. In your experience, what's the main cause for low impact communication?
It is really missing the truth of the revolution that it's not your presentation, it's theirs. So when we get out of ourself, it's a funny thing, when we get out of our own mind and what we think we're there to deliver for our own ends, we can have a greater impact because we're focused on the other person. And that's like plugging a charger into a socket. You have a strong connection, the power can go. Without that connection, without really being clear why you're there in service to the other person or people in front of you, that impact can't be had. So it's getting stuck in ourselves that cuts off the impact.
Yeah, and this is the key to effective communication. It's their presentation or their communication in general, not ours. Rose, thank you very much again. We've got some key highlights in the chart as well. Now we've got one more presentation, one more speaker. Michael is going to talk about the Q&A, questions and answers. How can you run a successful Q&A session? Michael, whenever you want, feel free to share your screen and off you go.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And it is a pleasure to be here and to see you all. I have to be honest with you, it's never fun to be the guy who goes last. but here I am. So let's get this show on the road. So how to run a successful Q&A session. You know, Q&A, I can tell you, is more important than ever as presentations get shorter and shorter and shorter. Well, we need more time exactly to talk Q&A. So let's get this on the road. Now imagine you're this business professional presenting from somewhere in some busy office to his board or to his directors. In this particular presentation, he's talking about increasing his customer base, and he's got some ideas. And it's something that is very, very important that he wants his bosses to hear. So he's been a very good student, and he's done all the right things to make sure the presentation has gone well. He has, first of all, identified his objectives, his professional objectives, but also his personal. He has had a look at the context. He's analyzed the audience. He knows them well. He's put together the right messages and ideas that they need to hear. And you know what? He's done some storytelling. He's structured the ideas in a way that makes sense to him. And if it makes sense to him, it's going to make sense to them, hopefully. And then finally, he's rehearsed. And, you know, he's been a very good student. And you know what? They're happy. Smiles on their faces. Everything's gone really, really well. So the big boss then asks him a very tricky question about the strategy going forward to increase the customer base. Well, you know, and it's tricky because the first question in Q&A, and he doesn't have the answer. In fact, he's trying to find the answer, and he's stalling and umming and ahhing, and the result is that his credibility is diminishing very, very fast. And so he kind of answers it, and it doesn't really go down very well. And then he gets another question, and the other question is also hard for him to answer too. And so what happens is that all that good work that he did in that initial presentation has gone down the chute. And as you can see, he's having a tumbleweed moment as that tumbleweed there goes through the room. So I'll just say, never, ever underestimate Q&A. Always prepare. 3 things to think about. 1, the groundwork, preparation. 2, the message itself, or the messages that you need to get across. And 3, the combat. So let's start with the groundwork. And I'll start with this very important thing. What's keeping you up at night? If you've been invited to give a presentation and you know you have questions which are important, are there any questions that really are worrying you and you really don't want to answer? Identify them, write them down, and start figuring out how you're going to answer them. Really, really important. And sometimes you're going to be invited to give Q&A, and you're only going to be giving Q&A. Imagine if you've been invited into a TV studio, you're going to be on TV. You really, really need to prepare this, and you really, really need to ask yourself that question: what's keeping me awake at night? What's the worst thing that they can possibly ask me? Now, Andrea, I'm sorry about this because you asked me not to talk about the ABC, but I have to talk about it very quickly because I know a lot of you have already heard about the ABC from Andrea. For those of you who don't know it, it's a very key tool that we use at Ideas on Stage about preparing a presentation, but it can also be used for preparing Q&A. It can also be used even for writing an article or putting together a video. So it's really identifying, 1, who your audience are, A, then B, what is their burning need? What is the reason that they are there? What do they need from this communication? And C, above all, what's the context? And when it comes to Q&A, context is extremely important. You know, imagine you're a tech startup offering a new app, giving a great new social experience, whether it's friendship or dating. How can you, for example, guarantee users' privacy in a way that people will really buy it? Okay, that's already right there. It's something that's very, very important to people right now. Okay, imagine also if you're working for a solar panel company, right? And you're going to give a Q&A, you might get a question asking you, okay, how can you guarantee supply of materials in what is a difficult moment right now anyway, geopolitically, with supply chains? But imagine the surge of demand we're going to get in 2022 in Europe when people start moving from gas to solar. So, you know, these are very important contextual questions. So you have to do some groundwork. You have to start doing some digging and some thinking. So check your facts, do your research, and above all, check your sources. This is something that all of us need to be very clear about these days when it comes to sharing information. Talk about our sources, you know, check our sources, especially when sharing on Facebook. So, yes, can you really say no comment? No, what in 2022? No, you can't. In fact, it's a mission of guilt. Anyone who says no comment, frankly, is probably thinks they're in the 1990s. So no, you can't. So that's it. That's the groundwork. Make sure you do it, and you will be on good, solid ground. Next is the message. The message. Well, let me give you a definition of a message according to myself. A message is a one-sentence statement that incorporates two things. One, of your most important points, and two, addressing one of your audience's most important issues, needs, or values. So let me give you an example. And just to give you a short version of that, it's really about the what is it you are saying and why it matters to the audience. All right. So let me give you an example from us, from Ideas on Stage. You know, so if, for example, I was talking to someone who wants to raise money or working for a startup, we would pitch them with this idea or this message. We have amazing tools and a decade of experience helping to find the right formula to assist in raising the funds you need to scale and beat the competition. There you go. So there's the what and why it matters. Another example, Ideas on Stage. Great ideas can solve the world's most difficult problems, but the architects of those ideas need the right help in order to craft the messages that bring those ideas to light. You know, so that's the kind of structure that I'm talking about of effective messages. What is it that I want to get across, and why is it interesting for you? Now, the thing is about messages is that one is very, very important to show that the messages that you convey, that there's nothing to hide. It's very, very important sometimes to use filters. Now, I say this because even though, you know, transparency is absolutely everything when it comes to questions, and I'll talk about that a bit after. Accountability is very, very important, but in reality is that sometimes there are topics that you really, really can't talk about. And we've actually worked with clients who've come and have brought us in to coach them on very, very sensitive matters where really they just got to keep off some of the hot topics. So we have this tool, which is really, really great, called the traffic light technique. And it's super simple. It works like this. It's basically red light, yellow light, and green light, right? As you can see. So the green light are the things that you must say. And not only must you say them, but you have to say them repeatedly. Okay, so you keep saying them, but you don't sound like a robot. It's got to sound organic, but you do come back to them each time. Next is the amber stuff. So the nice to haves. This is the stuff that some people might call top spin. So the extra sort of added pizzazz, but always making sure that you're coming back to those core messages in the greens. And then finally, you have the things that you can't say, the red light. All right, so these are things you have to avoid, whatever happens. Now, let me give an example of where this could be applied from actually a pretty complicated scenario that the former head of BP, Tony Hayward, had back in 2010 during the Deepwater Horizon disaster. Tony, unfortunately, is only famous for having said one thing: "I'd like my life back." This was very unfortunate. So if you attribute what happened with that particular press conference to the traffic light technique, you'll see that some of the things that everyone seems to remember were all red. I'd like my life back. It wasn't our fault. I blame the contractors and owners of the rig. And the Gulf of Mexico is a very big ocean, so it could have been worse. Now, he didn't say all of those things, but people associated to him and his communication team did say it, and this was very unfortunate. That means to say that all of the stuff that they did say in the green messages was overshadowed. And this is something that in the moment really has to be avoided. And if you were going to have some amber messages, they might look like that. Okay. So that's about the message, how to construct it and how to filter it. And now I want to finish on the combat. It's funny because in previous incarnations of this presentation, I've often called it the dance, but in my development of this material, I realized that actually a dancing is far too complicit for real Q&A, because it is kind of a combat. In fact, it's martial arts. And the key thing about Q&A is agility. It's really kind of that suppleness of being able to roll with the punches and never forgetting that you are in control. It is your show, all right? So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce you to the Q&A cycle. Now, this is heavily borrowed from a wonderful book by Jerry Weissman, who is a very decorated coach and consultant who authored some great books, in particular in the line of fire. And he in turn learned a lot of these techniques from his career in television. And if you get a chance, please watch my interview with Jerry, which we conducted over the Christmas period. And so it's in 5 steps. The first step is really, really easy. So you open the floor. Imagine if you're talking to journalists, or if you're at an event, you've got questioners in the audience, and you've maybe just pitched your product or your service. So you open the floor, you recognize a speaker, and you then give the floor to them to answer a question. How simple is that? The first 3 steps are super simple. Then it starts to get a bit more difficult, because once you hear the question, so imagine you're a startup and you are proposing this social app that is, you know, kind of combining both friendship and dating, and it's really catching on. And then someone says, well, you know, actually, I have a question for you. I think that this is the kind of app that if you use it, then all of a sudden you see stuff appearing on your Facebook feed, on your Twitter, in your email spam. You know, I think that a lot of companies aren't very honest. So this kind of question goes rambling on and on and on and on and on. And this, unfortunately, can happen a lot. It's why it's very important to employ active listening. And I say that because often is the big danger with Q&A is the speed, the want to answer the question straight away. As soon as you hear the beginning, you're like, oh, no, I know the answer. Right, this is what we're looking for, right? But you're not listening. You're anticipating what it is that they are going to say. So you can't do that, and you have to do something which comes from the Zen arts, which is called to empty your cup, and practice this idea of completely surrendering any kind of preemptive answer and actually just really trying to listen to what they're saying. All the time giving visual cues that you're listening to them, breathing, giving head nods. Yes, I catch it. I hear what you're saying. Very good. And constructively, to be more specific, really look for the meaning in what they're saying in the question. So look for the keywords like nouns and verbs. Okay, hear the noun, hear the verb. Okay, good. All that time, you don't have an answer yet. You're just listening. You're sifting through the debris of that question. Then once you've got that information, you retake the floor, you thank them for the question. And if you feel you have the answer, if you feel comfortable with it, then you can go ahead and give the answer. But if you don't, you need to paraphrase. And paraphrasing is really great security to sort of basically establish a kind of contract with the person who's giving the question, to say, all right, so if I understand what you correctly, what you're asking about is your concern over privacy. Is that correct? And usually they will nod their head. Yes, that's what I'm saying. So if you get a head nod, then that's okay. You can go ahead and answer the question. So you've established this contact already. Sometimes also, if you might get some confrontational language in a question. What's great about paraphrasing is you can filter that question and get rid of any sort of confrontational words or any violent language and give it back to them. So if someone says, for example, you know, I think many companies are dishonest about their privacy policy. So you can say, okay, so what you're saying is that you feel that there are many companies out there who are not transparent about privacy policies. Is that correct? You see, so already diffusing the negative language kind of puts things in a better frame of mind. I will say also that, you know, remaining non-violent in a Q&A is very, very important. You know, just never allow yourself to be provoked. You know, keep breathing and keep rolling with the punches, and try always to be clear and address the needs. So there you have it. So you provide the answer, everyone's happy, and then you repeat the cycle with the next person. Now, all of that might not be necessary each time, but you know that if you get really, really tough question, you can rely on this as a tool. So that's just some final points for you. You must answer tough questions directly. Do prepare them in advance. Don't accept misleading false assumption questions. These questions can be a bit toxic. And if someone says something that frankly isn't true, you can just dismiss it as untrue. And then finally, move on from irrelevant questions because, well, they happen sometimes. And, yeah. To save their face, thank you very much for that question, but we'll stick to the topic. Thank you. So there you go. That's the summary of what we've covered, the groundwork, the message, and the combat. I haven't had a chance to look at any of your questions because I find it very difficult to present and read questions at the same time, but I'd be very happy to have them now. Thank you.
Yes, Michael, thank you very much. We do have a question from Dan, and the question is, if possible, should you ask for questions before the presentation? So as you prepare, should you ask the audience for questions before you do the presentation? And also, and that's a follow-up, another approach, should you plant someone with a question that you already know and prepared for the first question to get the Q&A off on a strong note?
All right. First of all, thank you for the questions, Dan. When you say ask question, you mean ask the audience for just questions to get the debate going at the beginning of the presentation, or ask them, does anyone want to ask any questions before I start?
I think what it means, Michael, that's my understanding, like before the presentation, should you ask the audience if they have any questions, like before you do the presentation, if that's possible, so that you know in advance what questions you may get? If there is an opportunity for you to ask the audience in advance, do you have any questions? Should you do that?
Well, personally, I wouldn't do it, but I'd say try it. If for example, it can give you some important feedback as you start the presentation, then yeah. If you have any doubts, or if you need to get into a debate or to an exchange before you start the presentation, then absolutely. Otherwise, wait for the Q&A afterwards. And the second question was about planting questions, right?
Yep.
I think that can work very well for some people, particularly in some cultures where audiences are known to not ask a question, or it's very, very slow to get going. You know, here in Paris, in France, there's a cultural aspect where people are hesitant to put their hand up quickly. So it can be useful to have a planting question. Absolutely. And maybe Dan was my plant. You never know.
And we also have Michael, another question. Isn't the bigger decision questions during presentation, or wait till the end? So I think the question is, I think, should you take the questions as they come, or should you wait until the end?
It's entirely up to you. I always come back to my point about being in control. If you feel that the people are not going to affect your serenity during that presentation by interrupting you, then to go ahead, take the questions. But if it's quite high stakes, and if you really need to focus on what it is you're saying, put the session at the end. Okay.
Michael, another question from Mary.
Yeah.
Why do they never answer questions directly? And so is that a good strategy? Let's say, I think what Mary also means, is that a good strategy for us? We are not politicians.
Yeah, you're living in the UK. Look, it's a complex business, politics, and people can't say what they want to say. It's very complicated. I think in politics we are in a difficult situation, in a difficult period where people are not very clear. And I don't think there's any quick solution with this. Fortunately, in business, and we don't have the same luxury, and that's why in business we can never allow the same culture to get involved.
Okay, perfect. And Michael, I do have a question for you.
Yeah.
And now you gave us a lot of practical tips today. Is there one thing in particular that we need to avoid as presenters when answering questions?
I would say always it's really important to remember that you're in control. It's your show. Don't feel you have to rush. Take your time. Take a beat, take a breath.
Which is connected to what Rose was saying before as well. Okay, yeah. I see a couple of other questions. Let's see if we've got time. Cassandra, how do you delegate answers to questions effectively when you have multiple team members who can speak to it?
Yeah, well, I think you have to organize yourself in advance about who's going to be there on the panel of people who can answer questions, and make that very clear at the beginning. Okay, these are who are here to answer, so that people answering questions can see already who's at their disposal to answer questions. I think that's important to establish that at the beginning, and then you just have to organize yourself. So when the appropriate question comes from the right person, then that person takes the answer. Is that the question? Is that the right answer?
If that's not the case, Cassandra, feel free to let us know. In the meantime, one more final question, Michael, from Angelica.
Yeah.
Do you have ideas on what to do if the audience doesn't have questions? That's a great one. I can also share something, but please feel free to go first, Michael.
Yeah, you know, I can only speak from my own experience. I really, really try to get a Q&A session going at the end. Because for me, a Q&A session is really an opportunity to continue this discussion and get some exchange. So I really, really try to push the audience in a gentle way, say, please, any questions? And then I will remind them, so any questions about some of the material I presented to you. So for example, any questions about groundwork, any questions about messaging, any questions about the combat, you know? So you're sort of helping them to step forward. If you really, if they don't ask questions, then that's it. You know, I would say if you have nothing else to say, I'd say leave it there.
Yeah, and also one thing that works really well, Angelica, is this. Now, when you say towards the end of the presentation, you could say something like, okay, like, are there any questions? And then you're right, sometimes there are no questions. And often the reason why there are no questions is not necessarily because there are no questions, but often it's simply because as presenters, we haven't given the audience the time to think about some questions. It's very simple. So a very simple thing you can do is you can prepare a just in case question of your own, a question that you can ask yourself. So you could say something like, okay, what questions do you have? And then you wait for a few seconds. If there are some questions, great, you take them and you have the interaction. If there are no questions, then you can say something along the lines of, and then of course you can use your own language. Okay, as you think about your first question, let me ask myself, let me address one thing that I get asked all the time at the moment, which is this. And then you ask yourself your question, you give yourself the answer, and I can promise you, by the time you finish with your answer, it is much more likely that there are a few questions coming up. You've broken the ice as well. Okay, so that's one thing. And let's take maybe one more question that we do need to close. We can't go long. From Mike, how to manage a person who is not asking a question but making a speech?
Oh, that's a very, very good point. I've seen that happen a lot. Yes, occasionally in events, you might have someone who stands up and starts to take over the show, and you have to politely remind them that we have to move on. Thank you very much for the question. I'm afraid that's all the time we have. We have other questions, and politely remind them to move on.
Yeah. You are in control.
If they don't, you call security. No.
Yeah, it's the idea.
No, but it's good. I mean, honestly, and I've seen plenty of events, particularly here in Paris, when the minute some guy gets the mic, and he's off, you have to step in and in a very non-confrontational way, just remind them of the objectives and that other people need questions. So that's it.
Excellent. Michael, thank you very much. And thanks, everybody. Michael, Rose, Phil, thanks to everybody for attending. Now, as we wrap this up, just a couple of final messages from my side. Now, if you, of course, in a brief time, we've only been able to cover the main points today. If you'd like to learn more, if you are interested in these ideas, if you want to become a more confident presenter, either for yourself or for your team, then there are 3 key things you can do: book, scorecard, and consultation. Now, the book is Phil's book, Business Presentation Revolution. He published it last year. Now, of course, I'm biased. There it is, Phil. I am biased, but I do think that it is a fantastic book on all things presentation skills, communication. If you haven't seen it, Business Presentation Revolution, you can find it on Amazon. Although what I'll do is I'll send you a follow-up email. Check it out, because sometimes technology gets in the way. And I'm going to include a link to the recording. Feel free to rewatch it, send it to your friends, your colleagues. I'm also going to include a link with additional free resources, including a free copy of Phil's book, the PDF version. Okay, so that's one thing. The other thing you can do is the scorecard. Now, some of you have seen it already. If you haven't seen it, let me see. Yes, no, we don't have the link here, but you see the link on the slide. ideasonstage.com/score, like when you score in football. Now, this is the Confident Presenter Scorecard. It's an online tool that you can use to very quickly assess your presentation skills. You just need to answer a few questions, very simple, yes and no. It takes less than 3 minutes for free, and you'll get a score, what that score means to you, and it also identifies opportunities for improvement. Check it out again, ideasonstage.com/score. And then the consultation. Now, this is a free consultation, either with me or somebody on the team. And now this is not for everybody. This is only for, we've got 3 spots available. This is only for established business owners or business leaders who are motivated to take their presentation skills to a higher level, either for themselves or for their teams, or both. And we're also ready to take action to make it happen. So if that's you, what we would do in these sessions is we would look at where you are today with your presentation skills. Again, you or your teams, or maybe you have an important event, an important presentation coming up. We can look at that. Where you want to be, what you're trying to achieve, and also what's in the way. Based on that, I can explain to you what you need to do if you really want to get this right. And then with no obligation from your side, but that also becomes an opportunity for you to learn more about how we work with our clients. So no obligation, but the objective of the consultation will be for both of us to understand if there is a fit between what you may be looking for and what we have to offer. So if you're interested, all you need to do is just type yes in the chat. I see a few yeses already in the private chat. Now, up to you. You can express your interest in the private chat. You can do it in the public chat, as you prefer. Just to clarify, though, if you're typing yes, first of all, you are not committing to anything. You're just expressing your interest. And also, that doesn't mean that we'll go ahead with a consultation. So if you type yes, you are expressing your interest, then we'll get in touch quickly to see if you qualify. And then if that's the case, we'll go ahead and arrange some time to speak. And that's it. Now, we talked about many things today. If there is one thing I would really like you to remember is that until you are a great presenter, business is hard. Until you are a great presenter, your only job should be to become one. And I believe that there's never been a better time for you to become better presenters. Why? Because if you look at what's happening with things like automation, robots, technology, artificial intelligence, you see today, more than ever, having a good idea isn't good enough. Think about it. If you want to land your dream job, or sell products, lead teams, build brands, trigger movements, if you want to do any of these things, then you need to be able to persuade people and inspire them. And this is not something that a robot will be able to do, never. This is not something that now Zoom will do for you. No, you still need to take responsibility for communicating your ideas in the most powerful way. And that's why being able to present effectively is a skill that will become only more important, not less. So if you are here today, it's because maybe not, but maybe you are only at the beginning of your journey to becoming the best presenters you can be. And I can promise you, it's the smallest investment you can make to yourselves to make the biggest difference to your business or careers. So if you haven't started that journey, that's my invitation to you. Start it. Start it today. Of course, if you do, I would love for you to share your journey with us. And the best way to see if that makes sense is for you to express your interest in the free consultation I mentioned. If you started that journey already, that's great. Keep going, you won't regret it, and your audience will thank you. Thank you very much again from all of us at Ideas on Stage. All the very best. Let's keep in touch. Ciao.